Marcus Chen stared at the email on his laptop screen, reading the same line for the fourth time. The words seemed to blur together as the reality of what he was seeing finally sank in. Congratulations to Rebecca Martinez on her promotion to Regional Sales Director. We look forward to her leadership in driving our Q4 initiatives forward. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The position he had been promised, the role he had spent 18 months preparing for, the promotion that should have been his after leading the most successful product launch in the company's history. Instead, it had gone to Rebecca, his closest colleague and the woman he had trusted with every detail of his strategic plans for the past year. The notification sound from his phone pulled him back to the present, a text from Rebecca herself. "Sorry you had to find out this way. Drinks tonight to celebrate? My treat." Marcus had always prided himself on being a team player. At 34, he had spent 7 years climbing the corporate ladder at Pinnacle Technologies, a mid-sized software company based in downtown Seattle. What started as an entry-level position in business development had evolved into a senior role managing key client relationships and spearheading product launches that consistently exceeded revenue targets. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, casting long shadows across the open office space. Marcus sat in his ergonomic chair, still processing the email that had arrived at 6:30 that morning. The coffee in his mug had grown cold hours ago, but he hadn't noticed. His mind was racing through the events of the past 18 months, trying to piece together how everything had gone so wrong. Rebecca Martinez had joined the Seattle office 2 years ago, transferring from the company's smaller Portland branch. She was sharp, ambitious, and had an infectious energy that made her popular with both colleagues and clients. Marcus had been assigned to help her acclimate to the larger office environment and the more complex client portfolio that came with the Seattle territory. What had started as a professional mentorship had quickly evolved into something resembling a genuine friendship. Rebecca was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in learning, and seemed to share Marcus's vision for where the company could grow. They often stayed late discussing strategy, brainstorming solutions to client challenges, and sharing stories about their career aspirations. Marcus remembered the exact moment when James Sullivan, the CEO, had first mentioned the regional sales director position. It was during the company's annual retreat in the San Juan Islands last October. Marcus had just finished presenting the preliminary results of the CloudSync product launch, a revolutionary project management software that he had shepherded from concept to market in record time. "Marcus," James had said, pulling him aside after the presentation while other executives mingled with cocktails on the resort's terrace overlooking the water, "I've been watching your work closely, especially with CloudSync. The board is impressed with your results and your leadership approach. We're creating a new position, Regional Sales Director for the Pacific Northwest. It would mean overseeing all sales operations from Vancouver down to San Francisco. Are you interested?" The question had been rhetorical, really. It was the kind of opportunity Marcus had been working toward his entire career. The role would mean a significant salary increase, stock options, and, most importantly, the chance to implement his vision for sustainable growth across multiple markets. He had accepted on the spot, though James had cautioned that the official announcement wouldn't come until the following spring after the Q1 numbers were finalized. That conversation had taken place 11 months ago. Since then, Marcus had thrown himself into preparing for the role. Characteristic thoroughness. He had researched market trends across every major city in the Pacific Northwest, developed comprehensive, competitive analyses, and created detailed expansion strategies for each potential market. He had even enrolled in an executive leadership program at the University of Washington, attending weekend classes while maintaining his full-time responsibilities. More importantly, he had shared all of this preparation with Rebecca. She had been his sounding board for every idea, his collaborator on every strategy document, and his closest confidant throughout the process. When he struggled with the leadership coursework, she helped him practice presentations. When he needed feedback on his market analysis reports, she was the first person he turned to. When he had doubts about his readiness for such a significant role, she was there to remind him of his accomplishments and boost his confidence. The irony wasn't lost on him now. Every strategy session, every late-night brainstorming meeting, every document he had shared with Rebecca in the spirit of collaboration had essentially been a masterclass in how to win the promotion he thought was already his. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a calendar notification. Team meeting, new leadership announcement, 2 p.m., conference room A. He glanced at the clock in the corner of his computer screen. It was already 1:15. In 45 minutes, he would have to sit in a room with his colleagues and listen to Rebecca's promotion being officially announced, probably followed by a speech about her vision for the role. A vision that would sound remarkably similar to the one he had spent months developing. The elevator ride to the conference room felt longer than usual. Marcus tried to maintain his composure, nodding politely at colleagues who stepped on and off at various floors. Sarah Kim from accounting smiled at him and mentioned something about the beautiful weather, but her words seemed to come from underwater. Everything felt surreal, as if he were watching his life happen to someone else. Conference room A was already crowded when Marcus arrived. The entire sales team was there, along with representatives from marketing, product development, and senior management. Rebecca stood near the front of the room, talking animatedly with James Sullivan and Patricia Wong, the VP of Sales. She was wearing a navy blue blazer that Marcus recognized as new, probably purchased specifically for this moment. When she caught sight of Marcus entering the room, Rebecca's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. She excused herself from the executives and made her way over to him, weaving between clusters of colleagues. "Marcus, I'm so glad you're here," she said, reaching out to touch his arm in a gesture that struck him as both familiar and completely foreign. "I was hoping we could talk after the meeting. There's so much I want to discuss with you about the new role." Her enthusiasm seemed authentic, which made everything worse somehow. Marcus managed a tight smile and mumbled something about congratulations before finding a seat toward the back of the room. He needed space to process what was happening, and he definitely didn't want to be in the front row for this particular performance. James Sullivan called for attention at exactly 2 o'clock. The room gradually quieted as conversations wound down and people found seats around the large oval table or claimed spots along the walls. "Thank you all for making time for this announcement," James began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him successful in transforming Pinnacle Technologies from a struggling startup into a regional powerhouse. "As you know, we've been experiencing unprecedented growth over the past 2 years. Our revenue is up 43%. We've expanded our client base by over 60%, and we've successfully launched 3 major products that are now industry standards." Marcus found himself staring at a spot on the wall just above James's head, trying to...
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
disconnect from the words that he knew were coming. This growth has created an opportunity for us to restructure our sales operations to better serve our expanding market. We're creating a new position, Regional Sales Director for the Pacific Northwest, which will oversee all sales activities from Vancouver, British Columbia, down to San Francisco, California. The room was completely silent now. Everyone knew this announcement was coming, and most people had probably assumed Marcus would be the natural choice for the role. "I'm pleased to announce that Rebecca Martinez will be stepping into this position effective immediately." Polite applause filled the room. Marcus forced his hands to come together in a mechanical clapping motion, though he felt completely detached from the action. Around him, colleagues were turning to look at him with expressions ranging from surprise to sympathy to confusion. Rebecca had moved to stand beside James at the front of the room. Her posture was confident but not arrogant, professional but approachable. Marcus had to admit she looked the part. "Rebecca brings a unique combination of strategic thinking and hands-on execution to this role," James continued. Over the past year, she has developed comprehensive market analyses for every major city in our expanded territory, created detailed competitive assessments, and designed innovative approaches to client acquisition and retention that I believe will drive significant growth in the coming quarters. Each word felt like a physical blow. Marcus recognized every accomplishment James was attributing to Rebecca because he had lived through developing each one. The market analyses James was praising were based on research Marcus had conducted over months of weekend work. The competitive assessments had emerged from countless late-night sessions where he had walked Rebecca through his findings and methodologies. The client acquisition strategies were refinements of approaches Marcus had been developing since his earliest days at the company. "I'd like to invite Rebecca to say a few words about her vision for the role," James concluded, stepping aside to give her the floor. Rebecca moved to the center of the room with the kind of confidence that suggested she had been preparing for this moment for quite some time. She smiled warmly at the assembled group, making eye contact with various colleagues around the room. When her gaze reached Marcus, she held it for just a moment longer than necessary, and he thought he detected something that might have been guilt or perhaps pity. "Thank you, James, and thank you all for being here today," Rebecca began. "I'm incredibly honored to take on this role, and I'm excited about the opportunities ahead of us. The Pacific Northwest represents one of the most dynamic and competitive markets in our industry, but I believe we have everything we need to not just succeed, but to dominate." She paused, letting the ambitious statement sink in before continuing. "My approach to this role will be built on 3 core principles. First, data-driven decision-making. We need to understand our markets at a granular level, identifying opportunities and challenges with precision rather than relying on assumptions or outdated strategies. Second, collaborative innovation. The best ideas come from bringing together different perspectives and expertise, and I plan to work closely with teams across all departments to develop solutions that serve our clients better than anyone else in the industry. Third, sustainable growth. We're not interested in short-term wins that compromise our long-term position. We want to build relationships and market presence that will drive revenue for years to come." Marcus felt nauseous. Not only were these principles directly lifted from conversations he had had with Rebecca over the past year, but she was articulating them with the exact phrasing he had used in his own preparation materials. The data-driven decision-making emphasis had come from a discussion they'd had about the limitations of the company's previous intuition-based approach to market expansion. The collaborative innovation concept had emerged during a particularly productive brainstorming session where Marcus had outlined his philosophy for cross-departmental cooperation. The sustainable growth framework was something he had developed for his leadership coursework and had shared with Rebecca when she expressed interest in understanding long-term strategic planning. "I want to be clear that this success will depend on all of us working together," Rebecca continued. "I've learned so much from the talented people in this room, and I look forward to continuing those collaborative relationships as we move forward." Again, her eyes found Marcus in the back of the room. This time, he was certain he saw something that looked like an apology in her expression, though it was so brief he might have imagined it. The rest of the meeting was a blur of congratulations, logistical discussions about reporting structures, and questions about timeline and implementation. Marcus participated minimally, offering non-committal responses when directly asked for input and otherwise trying to become invisible. When James finally dismissed the meeting, Marcus was among the first to leave. He needed air, space, and time to think. But as he reached the elevator bank, he heard Rebecca's voice behind him. "Marcus, wait!" He turned reluctantly to find her approaching with an expression of concern mixed with something that might have been excitement about her new role. "Can we talk? Maybe grab coffee downstairs?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment, studying the face of someone he had considered not just a colleague, but a genuine friend. Someone he had trusted with his professional aspirations, his strategic thinking, and his honest assessments of the challenges facing their industry. Someone who had apparently been taking notes the entire time. "I don't think that's a good idea right now," he said finally. "Marcus, please, I know this must be difficult, but I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. We're still a team." The words sounded hollow, and Marcus wondered if Rebecca could hear it too. How could they still be a team when she had just been promoted to a position that made her his superior, using ideas and strategies he had developed? I need some time to process this, Marcus said, stepping into the elevator that had just arrived. Congratulations on the promotion. The elevator doors closed before Rebecca could respond, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the faint reflection of his own stunned expression in the polished metal. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of routine tasks and forced normalcy. Marcus responded to emails, attended a client call, and reviewed quarterly reports, but his mind kept returning to the morning's revelation and the afternoon's announcement. How had he missed the signs? Had Rebecca been planning this all along? Or had the opportunity simply presented itself, and she had seized it using the tools he had unknowingly provided? By the time 5:30 arrived, most of the office had cleared out. Marcus found himself alone in the sales department, staring out at the Seattle skyline as the sun began to set behind the Olympic Mountains in the distance. The city looked the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different now. His phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. "I know you're upset, but can we please talk? There's a lot you don't understand about how this happened." Marcus stared at the message for several minutes before deleting it without responding. He wasn't ready for explanations or justifications. He needed time to figure out what came next, both professionally and personally. The walk to his Capitol Hill apartment usually took about 20 minutes, but Marcus found himself taking a longer route through Pike Place Market and along the waterfront. The familiar sights and sounds of the city provided a comforting backdrop for his racing thoughts. How long had Rebecca been positioning herself for his promotion? Had their friendship been genuine, or had it been strategic from the beginning? Had James Sullivan been considering her for the role all along? Or had she somehow convinced him that she was the better candidate, using Marcus's own work as evidence of her capabilities? More importantly, what was Marcus supposed to do now? He could confront Rebecca directly, but what would that accomplish? He could approach James Sullivan or Patricia Wong with his concerns, but how could he prove that the ideas Rebecca had presented were originally his without sounding like a bitter colleague making excuses for his own disappointment? The most frustrating part was that Rebecca had executed her strategy flawlessly. She had positioned herself as collaborative and innovative, two qualities that were highly valued in the company culture. She had built relationships across multiple departments, making herself visible to senior leadership in ways that Marcus, focused on his own preparation and client work, had neglected to do. She had taken the foundational work Marcus had shared with her and developed it into a comprehensive vision that impressed the executives who would make the promotion decision. In a way, Marcus had to admire the sophistication of what she had accomplished, even as it devastated his own career prospects. His apartment felt smaller than usual that evening. Marcus sat on his couch with a beer he didn't really want, staring at his laptop screen and trying to update his resume. But every accomplishment he tried to list reminded him of conversations he had had with Rebecca, strategies he had shared, or insights he had developed that were now part of her professional toolkit. The CloudSync product launch that had brought him to James Sullivan's attention in the first place suddenly felt hollow. Rebecca had been involved in that project as well, contributing to client presentations and helping to coordinate the marketing rollout. How much of his success on that project was actually his own, and how much had been the result of collaborative work that she could now claim as shared achievement? Marcus closed the laptop and reached for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for, David Park, his former colleague who had left Pinnacle Technologies 6 months earlier for a senior position at a competing firm. David answered on the third ring. "Marcus, how's life at Pinnacle? Still climbing that corporate ladder?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course. What's going on?" Marcus found himself explaining the entire situation, starting with his conversation with James Sullivan at the company retreat and ending with that afternoon's announcement. David listened without interrupting, occasionally making sympathetic sounds or asking clarifying questions. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," David said when Marcus finished. You spent over a year preparing for a promotion that your CEO essentially promised you, sharing all of your preparation work with a colleague you considered a friend, and then that colleague was given the promotion using what sounds like your own strategic framework? That's about the size of it. David was quiet for a long moment. That's brutal, man, and sophisticated. This Rebecca sounds like she played a very smart long game. The worst part is that I can't prove any of it. She never stole documents or plagiarized my work directly. She just listened to everything I shared and then presented refined versions of the same ideas as her own insights. Which is actually more impressive in a twisted way. Direct plagiarism would have been risky and probably detectable, but absorbing your ideas, building on them, and then presenting them as her own original thinking, that's much harder to trace and much more likely to be successful. Marcus felt a mix of vindication and frustration at David's analysis. It was validating to have someone else recognize the sophistication of what Rebecca had done, but it also reinforced how unlikely it was that he could do anything about it. So what are my options? Mark asked.
Well, you could stay at Pinnacle and see if other opportunities develop. But honestly, after something like this, I'd be looking for an exit strategy. Even if you could prove what happened, you'd be seen as the guy who couldn't handle losing a promotion. And if you can't prove it, you're just the bitter colleague who got passed over. David paused, and Marcus could hear him typing in the background. Actually, let me ask you something. Are you interested in exploring opportunities outside of Pinnacle? Because I might know of something that would be perfect for you. I'm listening. My new company is expanding their West Coast operations. We need someone to lead business development for the entire region, and the role would be similar to what you were expecting to do at Pinnacle, but with better resources and probably better compensation. The CEO is someone I've worked with before, and I think you two would get along well. Marcus felt a flicker of interest for the first time since reading Rebecca's promotion announcement. Tell me more. Well, it would mean leaving Seattle. The position is based in San Francisco, though there would be travel throughout the West Coast. And it would mean starting over at a new company, building new relationships and learning new systems. But it would also mean getting out of a situation that's only going to get more uncomfortable as time goes on. They talked for another 20 minutes with David providing details about the company, the role, and the application process. By the time they hung up, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected to feel that day: optimism about the future. Maybe Rebecca had done him a favor. Maybe being forced out of his comfort zone at Pinnacle Technologies would lead to opportunities he never would have pursued otherwise. And maybe the best response to her betrayal wasn't confrontation or revenge, but simply moving forward and building something better. But as Marcus fell asleep that night, one thought kept nagging at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Rebecca's promotion than just clever positioning and strategic networking. Something about the timing, the way James Sullivan had described her qualifications, and the certainty with which she had presented her vision for the role suggested that she had known about the opportunity long before she should have. Which raised an uncomfortable question. If Rebecca had been planning this for months, what else might she have been doing to ensure her success? And more importantly, what else might Marcus discover if he started looking more carefully at the situation? The last thing he remembered before falling asleep was Rebecca's expression during the meeting that afternoon. The confidence, the preparation, the way she had looked at him with what might have been pity or guilt. She had known exactly how he would react to her promotion, which meant she had anticipated his disappointment and chosen to proceed anyway. That level of calculation suggested someone who was willing to sacrifice personal relationships for professional advancement. And if Rebecca was that ruthless in her ambition, Marcus wondered what other surprises might be waiting for him in the days and weeks ahead. The next morning arrived with the kind of persistent Seattle drizzle that seemed to seep into everything. Marcus woke up before his alarm, his mind immediately returning to the events of the previous day. For a brief moment, he wondered if it had all been an elaborate nightmare, but the email notification on his phone quickly dispelled that hope. 3 new messages from Rebecca, each one increasingly urgent in tone. Marcus made coffee and sat at his small kitchen table. finally opening the messages he had ignored the night before. The first was the celebratory text from yesterday. The second, sent around 9 in the evening, was longer and more defensive. I understand why you're upset, but I hope you'll give me a chance to explain how this really happened. It's not what you think. The third had arrived just after midnight. Marcus, please don't
Me out. Our friendship means too much to me. He deleted all three without responding and opened his laptop to review the email David had sent late the previous evening. The opportunity in San Francisco was even more attractive in the cold light of morning. The base salary was 15% higher than what he currently made, the equity package was substantial, and the role would give him oversight of business development across the entire West Coast, rather than just the Pacific Northwest. More importantly, it would allow him to escape the increasingly toxic environment that Pinnacle Technologies was sure to become. Marcus had no doubt that Rebecca would be a competent leader, but he also knew that working under someone who had systematically undermined him would be professionally and personally devastating. His phone rang as he was reviewing the job description David had forwarded. The caller ID showed James Sullivan's name, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Conversations with the CEO were rare and usually significant. "Good morning, James." "Marcus, I hope I'm not calling too early. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course." "I wanted to reach out personally about yesterday's announcement. I know it probably came as a surprise, and I wanted to make sure we had a chance to discuss your role in the new structure." Marcus chose his words carefully. "I appreciate that, James. I have to admit I was surprised by the decision." "I understand completely. And I want you to know that this doesn't reflect any dissatisfaction with your performance. Your work on the CloudSync launch was exceptional, and your client relationships are among the strongest in the company." There was a pause, and Marcus could hear James moving around his office, probably preparing for his first meeting of the day. The reality is that Rebecca brought a different skill set to the conversation. Her experience with market analysis and strategic planning, combined with her collaborative approach, made her the right fit for this particular role at this particular time. Each word felt carefully chosen, as if James had rehearsed this explanation. Marcus found himself analyzing the language, looking for clues about what had really influenced the decision. "I'd like to schedule some time for us to talk about your career development and where you see yourself growing within the organization. Are you available for lunch today?" Marcus glanced at his calendar, though he already knew he would accept the meeting. This conversation might provide insights into how the promotion decision had really been made, and it would also give him an opportunity to gauge whether staying at Pinnacle Technologies was even viable. "That works for me. Should we meet at the usual place?" "Actually, let's go somewhere a bit more private. How about the Metropolitan Grill? I'll make a reservation for 12:30. The choice of restaurant was interesting. The Metropolitan Grill was where James Sullivan took important clients and potential business partners, not current employees. The settings suggested that this conversation was more significant than a routine career development discussion. Marcus spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on his regular responsibilities while his mind raced through possible scenarios for the lunch meeting. Was James planning to offer him a different role within the company? Was he concerned about Marcus's reaction to Rebecca's promotion? Or was this simply damage control to prevent a valued employee from leaving in frustration? At 11:30, Marcus received another text from Rebecca. This one was different in tone. "Can we please talk? There are things about this situation that you don't understand. I never wanted it to happen this way." The message bothered him more than the previous ones because it suggested that Rebecca knew more about the promotion process than she had initially let on. If she never wanted it to happen this way, that implied she had some control over how it happened, which contradicted her earlier portrayal of the promotion as an unexpected opportunity. Marcus decided to respond this time.
"I'm not ready to have that conversation yet. I need some time to process everything." Her reply came within seconds. "I understand, but Marcus, please don't make any major decisions until we've talked. There's so much you don't know. The urgency in her message was unmistakable, and it made Marcus wonder what exactly she thought he might do. Was she concerned that he would complain to senior leadership, that he would leave the company, or was there something else she was worried about? The Metropolitan Grill was busy with the usual lunch crowd of business executives and well-dressed professionals. Marcus arrived a few minutes early and was seated at a corner table with excellent views of the restaurant and privacy for conversation. James Sullivan arrived precisely on time, looking polished and confident in a way that Marcus had always admired. "Thanks for making time for this," James said, settling into his chair and immediately signaling the waiter. "I know yesterday was a difficult day for you." "It was unexpected," Marcus replied carefully. They ordered quickly, James opting for his usual salmon while Marcus chose something he wasn't particularly interested in eating. The real purpose of this meeting wasn't the food. "I want to be direct with you, Marcus, because I respect both your professionalism and your intelligence. The decision to promote Rebecca wasn't taken lightly, and it wasn't a reflection of any shortcomings on your part." James paused to sip his water, and Marcus noticed that the CEO seemed slightly uncomfortable, which was unusual for someone who typically exuded confidence in every interaction. "The board has been pushing for more diversity in our leadership positions, particularly at the senior level. Rebecca's background and perspective bring something valuable to the role that aligns with our strategic goals for the next several years." Marcus felt a flash of anger at the implication that Rebecca's gender or ethnicity had been factors in the promotion decision, but he also recognized that James was being more honest than he had expected. Many companies were facing pressure to diversify their leadership teams, and Rebecca's qualifications combined with her demographic profile would certainly have made her an attractive candidate for a visible promotion. "I understand the business rationale," Marcus said, "but I'm curious about the timing. When was the final decision made?" James looked uncomfortable for the first time in the conversation. "The position was officially approved by the board 3 weeks ago. The selection process took place over the following 2 weeks. 3 weeks ago." Marcus felt the pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place. 3 weeks ago was when Rebecca had suddenly become much more interested in his strategic planning work, asking detailed questions about his market research and requesting copies of his analysis documents for her own learning. 3 weeks ago was when she had started working late more frequently, often staying in the office well past normal hours. 3 weeks ago was when she had begun scheduling coffee meetings with colleagues from other departments, building relationships that would become important references during the selection process. "How many candidates were considered for the role?" Marcus asked. "We interviewed 4 internal candidates and 2 external ones." Marcus trying to keep his expression neutral, but internally he was reeling. He had never been interviewed for the position. In fact, he had never even been informed that there was a formal selection process taking place. His assumption had been that the role was his based on James's conversation with him at the company retreat. But apparently that had been a preliminary discussion rather than a firm commitment. "I see. I don't recall being interviewed for the position." James's discomfort was now obvious. He looked down at his plate and took a bite of salmon before responding. "That's actually something I wanted to discuss with you. Your name was certainly in consideration, but when we began the formal process, Rebecca submitted a comprehensive application package that included detailed strategic plans, market analyses, and recommendations for the role. Her preparation was exceptional, and it demonstrated a level of initiative that impressed the entire selection committee." Marcus felt nauseous. The strategic plans and market analyses that had impressed the selection committee were almost certainly based on work he had shared with Rebecca during their collaborative sessions. She had taken his preparation for the role and presented it as her own initiative, while he had been completely unaware that there was even a formal application process. "I wasn't aware that applications were being accepted for the position," Marcus said carefully. "The process was somewhat informal initially. We sent out a general notice about the new role and invited interested candidates to submit materials for consideration. It's possible that the communication didn't reach everyone who might have been interested." Marcus knew he had never received any such communication, but he also realized that pursuing this line of questioning would only make him appear bitter and unprofessional. The damage was done, and James Sullivan was clearly trying to manage a situation that had become awkward for everyone involved. "What I'd like to focus on now is your future with the company," James continued, seeming relieved to move away from the details of the selection process. "We value your contributions enormously, and we want to make sure you have opportunities for growth and advancement." "What kind of opportunities?" "Well, Rebecca will need to build a strong team in her new role. The regional director position will require several senior managers to oversee different geographic areas and client segments. I think you would be an excellent candidate for one of those positions." The offer was exactly what Marcus had expected and exactly what he didn't want. Working as Rebecca's subordinate, helping her implement strategies that were based on his own work, would be professionally humiliating and personally devastating. "That's an interesting possibility," Marcus said diplomatically. "Can I ask about the timeline for those positions?" "Rebecca will be finalizing her organizational structure over the next few weeks. I would expect the new roles to be posted within the next month or so." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, buying himself time to formulate a response that wouldn't burn bridges unnecessarily. "I appreciate the opportunity, James, and I'm certainly interested in continuing to grow with the company. Would it be possible for me to take a few days to consider the options?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." They finished lunch with small talk about industry trends and the company's growth prospects, but Marcus's mind was elsewhere. The conversation had confirmed his suspicions about how Rebecca's promotion had been orchestrated, and it had also made clear that his future at Pinnacle Technologies would be as her subordinate. Walking back to the office, Marcus called David Park from his cell phone. "How did the lunch meeting go?" David asked without preamble. "About as expected. Rebecca apparently submitted a comprehensive application package that impressed the selection committee with detailed strategic plans and market analyses." Plans and analyses that sounded suspiciously familiar, I'm guessing? Exactly. "And I was never even informed that there was a formal application process." That's brutal. She really played this perfectly. "The CEO offered me a position working under her in the new regional structure." "And you're going to tell him to shove it, right?" Marcus laughed for the first time in 2 days. "Not in so many words, but yes." "How quickly could I start the application process for the San Francisco position?" "I can make some calls this afternoon. The CEO I mentioned is actually in town this week for meetings with potential investors. If you're serious about this, I might be able to arrange an informal conversation before he heads back to California." "I'm
Serious. Good. Send me your updated resume, and I'll see what I can put together." Marcus spent the afternoon updating his resume and preparing for what might be the most important interview of his career. The irony wasn't lost on him that Rebecca's betrayal was potentially opening doors to opportunities he might never have pursued otherwise. At 4:30, his phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the caller ID, and this time, Marcus decided to answer. "Hello, Rebecca?" "Marcus, thank you for picking up. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I really need to talk to you." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can we meet somewhere private? There are things about the situation that you don't understand, and I need to explain them to you before you make any decisions about your future." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable, and Marcus found himself curious about what she felt compelled to explain. "Where do you want to meet?" "There's a coffee shop in Fremont, away from downtown, Milstead & Co. Do you know it?" Marcus knew the place. It was small, intimate, and far enough from the business district that they were unlikely to encounter colleagues or clients. "I can be there at 6. "Thank you, Marcus. This conversation is more important than you realize." The drive to Fremont gave Marcus time to think about what Rebecca might want to tell him. Her insistence that there were things he didn't understand suggested that the story was more complicated than it appeared. Perhaps she had been pressured into applying for the role, or perhaps there were political dynamics at play that he wasn't aware of. Alternatively, this might simply be an attempt to manage his reaction and prevent him from causing problems for her new position. If Rebecca was concerned that Marcus might complain to senior leadership or create difficulties for her transition into the role, this conversation could be designed to neutralize those threats. Milstead & Co. was busy but not crowded, filled with the usual mix of students, freelancers, and neighborhood residents. Marcus spotted Rebecca immediately. She was sitting at a corner table, nervously stirring a coffee that looked untouched. She was dressed more casually than usual, in jeans and a sweater that made her look younger and less polished than the confident executive who had addressed the company that afternoon.
Thank you for coming, she said as Marcus sat down across from her. You said there were things I needed to understand? Rebecca looked around the coffee shop nervously as if checking to make sure they couldn't be overheard. What I'm about to tell you has to stay between us, at least for now. If this gets out before I can figure out how to handle it, it could destroy my career and potentially put the company in legal jeopardy. Marcus felt his curiosity intensify. Legal jeopardy was not something he had expected to be part of this conversation. I'm listening. Rebecca took a deep breath and seemed to steel herself for what she was about to say. I didn't apply for the regional director position. Marcus stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. What do you mean you didn't apply for it? I mean, I never submitted an application package. I never expressed interest in the role. I never even knew it existed until Patricia Wong approached me 3 weeks ago and told me I was being considered for a promotion. The coffee shop seemed to grow quieter around them as Marcus tried to understand the implications of what Rebecca was telling him. But James said you'd submitted comprehensive strategic plans and market analyses. I did, but not as an application for a job I didn't know existed. Patricia told me that senior leadership was evaluating the sales team's strategic thinking capabilities, and she asked me to prepare a presentation demonstrating my understanding of market dynamics and growth opportunities. Rebecca's hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. She said it was part of a company-wide assessment to identify high-potential employees for future
Development programs. She gave me specific parameters for the analysis and asked me to focus on the Pacific Northwest market specifically. Marcus felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting again, forming a picture that was more complex and more disturbing than he had imagined. So you prepared the materials thinking they were for a general assessment, but they were actually being used to evaluate you for a specific promotion? Exactly. And Marcus, the parameters Patricia gave me, the specific areas she asked me to focus on, they were almost identical to the topics you and I had been discussing in our strategy sessions. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. Patricia Wong, the VP of sales, had essentially created a situation where Rebecca would unknowingly compete for his promotion using his own strategic framework. Did Patricia know about our collaboration on those topics? That's what I've been trying to figure out. She never mentioned you specifically, but some of her questions were so detailed and so specific that she had to have gotten the information from somewhere. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Marcus, I think Patricia set this whole thing up deliberately. I think she wanted you out of consideration for the regional director role, and she used me to make it happen. The accusation hung in the air between them like a live wire. Marcus found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about the promotion process and his own position within the company. Why would Patricia want me out of consideration? I don't know for certain, but I have some theories. And that's why I needed to talk to you before you made any decisions about your future. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Marcus a text message thread. These are messages Patricia sent me over the past 3 weeks. Look at the timestamps and the content. Marcus scrolled through the messages, his sense of unease growing with each exchange. The text showed Patricia providing Rebecca with increasingly detailed guidance on her strategic presentation, including specific market data points and analytical frameworks that Marcus recognized as elements of his own research. More disturbing was the tone of the messages. Patricia wasn't simply asking Rebecca to prepare materials for evaluation. She was coaching her, providing her with information and insights that would make her presentation more impressive, and even suggesting specific language and presentation techniques. This looks like Patricia was actively helping you compete for the position, Marcus said. That's exactly what it looks like. And Marcus, some of the information she gave me, there's no way she could have known it unless someone had shared it with her. Marcus felt a chill as he realized what Rebecca was implying. You think Patricia had access to my preparation materials? I think Patricia had access to everything. Your research, your strategic plans, probably even your conversations with James Sullivan about the role. Rebecca showed him another message. This one sent just 2 days before the promotion announcement. Look at this one.
The message read, "Remember, the key is to demonstrate collaborative leadership and innovative thinking. James values people who can build consensus while driving results. Your presentation should emphasize data-driven decision-making and sustainable growth strategies." Marcus recognized the language immediately. It was almost verbatim from notes he had taken during his leadership course, notes that he had shared with Rebecca during one of their strategy sessions. Patricia is using my own framework to coach you on how to impress James Sullivan. And I was too naive to realize what was happening until it was too late. Marcus sat back in his chair, trying to process the full scope of what Rebecca was revealing. If her account is accurate, then both of them had been manipulated by Patricia Wong in an elaborate scheme to control the outcome of the promotion process. Why would Patricia go to such lengths to keep me out of the regional director role?
That's what I've been trying to figure out. But Marcus, there's something else you need to know. Rebecca's expression grew even more serious, if that was possible. The day after the promotion was announced, Patricia called me into her office for what she said was a congratulatory conversation. But it wasn't congratulations. It was instructions. What kind of instructions? She told me that my success in the new role would depend on making the right strategic decisions and working with the right people. She was very specific about which colleagues I should rely on and which ones might not be supportive of the new direction. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, and I'm guessing I was on the list of people who might not be supportive. She said that some people might have difficulty adjusting to the new leadership structure and that it would be important for me to build my team with people who were fully committed to the company's future rather than dwelling on past disappointments. The message was clear. Patricia wanted Rebecca to exclude Marcus from her new team, effectively forcing him out of the company or into a significantly diminished role. "She's trying to get rid of me," Marcus said. "I think so. And I think this whole promotion situation was designed to accomplish that goal." They sat in silence for several minutes, both absorbing the implications of what Rebecca had revealed. Marcus found himself feeling a mix of vindication and anger. Vindication because his instincts about the promotion process had been correct, and anger because the manipulation had been even more extensive than he had suspected. "Rebecca, why are you telling me this?" She looks surprised by the question. "Because it's the truth, and because what Patricia did to both of us is wrong. But this puts you in an incredibly difficult position. If what you're saying is accurate, then your promotion was essentially the result of Patricia's manipulation. That could undermine your credibility and your effectiveness in the new role." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I know. I've been thinking about that constantly since Patricia's conversation with me yesterday. But Marcus, I can't build my career on something that was fundamentally dishonest, even if I wasn't aware of the dishonesty at the time." "What are you planning to do?" "I don't know yet, but I wanted you to know the truth before you made any decisions about your future, and I wanted to ask for your help in figuring out how to handle this situation." Marcus studied Rebecca's face, looking for any sign that this conversation itself was part of some larger manipulation. But her distress seemed genuine, and the information she had shared was too detailed and too damaging to her own position to be fabricated. "What kind of help?" "I need to understand the full scope of what Patricia did. I need to know how she got access to your materials, why she wanted you out of consideration for the promotion, and whether this is part of a larger pattern of manipulation within the company." Rebecca paused, seeming to gather her courage for what she was about to say next. "And I think we need to consider the possibility that Patricia's actions weren't just unethical, but actually illegal." The word hung between them like a challenge. Marcus had been thinking in terms of workplace politics and professional betrayal, but Rebecca was suggesting something more serious. Illegal how? If Patricia accessed your confidential materials without authorization, that could be theft of intellectual property. If she deliberately manipulated the promotion process to benefit her preferred candidate while excluding qualified applicants, that could be fraud or conspiracy. And if this is part of a pattern of behavior designed to force certain employees out of the company, that could be harassment or discrimination. Marcus felt the situation shifting again. What had started as a conversation about a disappointing promotion was evolving into something that could have serious legal and professional consequences for everyone involved. Rebecca, if you're right about this, then going forward with an investigation.
Destroy multiple careers and potentially expose the company to significant liability. I know. But Marcus, if we don't do anything, Patricia will continue to manipulate people and situations to serve her own agenda. And that's not fair to current employees or future ones. Marcus looked around the coffee shop, suddenly aware that they were discussing potentially explosive allegations in a public space. Other customers were absorbed in their own conversations and activities, but the gravity of what they were discussing made him feel exposed. We need to be very careful about how we proceed, he said finally. Agreed, but we do need to proceed. The question is how. Marcus thought about David Park's job opportunity in San Francisco. A few hours ago, it had seemed like an escape from an uncomfortable situation. Now it felt like running away from a fight that needed to be fought. I need some time to think about this, he said. Of course. But Marcus, whatever you decide to do about your own career, I hope you'll help me figure out how to address what Patricia did. I can't move forward in this role knowing that it was obtained through manipulation and deception. They exchanged contact information and agreed to meet again in a couple of days, after they had both had time to process the conversation and consider their options. Walking back to his car, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. Rebecca's revelations had transformed his understanding of recent events, but they had also created new dilemmas. Should he pursue the opportunity in San Francisco and put this entire situation behind him? Should he help Rebecca investigate Patricia's actions, potentially risking his own career in the process? Or should he try to find a middle ground that protected his own interests while addressing the ethical issues Rebecca had raised? One thing was clear. The next few days would be crucial in determining not just his own professional future, but potentially the future of several other people at Pinnacle Technologies. The stakes had suddenly become much higher than a simple promotion disappointment, and Marcus wasn't sure he was prepared for the battle that might be ahead. Marcus spent the weekend analyzing every interaction he'd had with Patricia Wong over the past year, searching for clues he might have missed. Sitting in his apartment with spreadsheets and documents scattered across his coffee table, he began to see patterns that had been invisible when viewed in isolation. Patricia's seemingly casual questions about his research progress, her requests for copies of his analysis for the department files, her suggestions about which colleagues he should collaborate with on various projects. What he had interpreted as supportive management now looked like systematic intelligence gathering. The breakthrough came on Sunday evening when Marcus remembered a conversation from 6 months earlier. Patricia had asked him to prepare a competitive analysis for a client presentation, but when he'd submitted the work, she'd said the client had postponed the meeting indefinitely. He had thought nothing of it at the time, but now he realized that Patricia had simply wanted access to his research methodology and findings. Marcus pulled out his laptop and began documenting every instance he could remember of Patricia requesting his work for reasons that, in retrospect, seemed questionable. By Monday morning, he had compiled a list of 12 separate occasions where Patricia had obtained his strategic materials under false or misleading pretenses. His phone rang at 7:30, interrupting his review of the documentation. The caller ID showed David Park's name. "I have good news and potentially complicated news," David said without preamble. "Start with the good news. My CEO wants to meet with you. He's flying back to San Francisco tonight, but he has time for breakfast this morning if you're available. 8:30 at the Four Seasons downtown." Marcus glanced at his calendar. He had a client call scheduled for 9:30, but this opportunity was too important to postpone. I'll be there. What's the complicated news? I may have mentioned your situation to him in more detail than I initially intended. He's very interested in your experience with corporate manipulation and strategic intelligence gathering. Apparently, his company has been dealing with some similar issues. What kind of similar issues? He didn't go into specifics, but he mentions something about competitors obtaining confidential strategic information through internal sources. He thinks your insights might be valuable beyond just the business development role we discussed. Marcus felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with apprehension. The conversation with Rebecca had opened his eyes to the sophisticated nature of corporate manipulation, and apparently, his experience was more relevant to other organizations than he had realized. "I'll see you at 8:30. The Four Seasons restaurant was elegant and discreet, exactly the kind of place where sensitive business conversations could take place without interruption. David was already seated at a corner table when Marcus arrived, talking quietly with a man in his 50s who radiated the kind of confidence that came from building successful companies. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet Richard Chen, CEO of Nexus Dynamics." The irony of sharing a last name wasn't lost on Marcus as he shook Richard's hand and accepted the seat across from him. "David tells me you've recently had some interesting experiences with corporate espionage," Richard said, getting straight to the point. "I'm not sure I'd call it espionage, but there have definitely been some unusual developments." "Tell me about them." Marcus found himself explaining the entire situation, from his initial conversation with James Sullivan about the promotion to Rebecca's revelations about Patricia's manipulation. Richard listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing Marcus to tell the story without interruption. "This Patricia Wong," Richard said when Marcus finished, "how long has she been with Pinnacle Technologies?" "About 4 years, I think. She came from a competitor, Morrison Systems." Richard and David exchanged a meaningful look. "Morrison Systems is one of our primary competitors," Richard explained. "We've been concerned about information leaks for the past 2 years, particularly related to our strategic planning and client acquisition strategies." Marcus felt the pieces of another puzzle beginning to align. "You think Patricia might be feeding information to her former employer?" "It would explain a lot of coincidences we've been experiencing. Morrison Systems has been remarkably successful at anticipating our market moves and undercutting our client proposals. We've been assuming they had developed superior intelligence capabilities, but corporate espionage through planted employees would be much more effective." David leaned forward. "Marcus, think about the timing of Patricia's actions. She's been systematically gathering strategic information from you and probably other employees. She manipulated a promotion process to remove you from a position where you might discover her activities, and she's trying to force you out of the company entirely. You think I was getting too close to something that could expose her?" "It's possible," Richard said. "Industrial espionage operations are most vulnerable when they involve employees who are intelligent enough to recognize patterns and confident enough to ask questions. From what David has told me about your background and what you've shared about this situation, you fit that profile exactly." The conversation continued for another hour, with Richard asking detailed questions about Pinnacle Technologies' organizational structure, strategic planning processes, and information security protocols. By the time they finished breakfast, Marcus had a job offer that exceeded his expectations and a new understanding of the situation he had been navigating. "I'd like you to consider joining Nexus Dynamics as our Director of Strategic Intelligence," Richard said, as they prepared to leave. "The role would involve business development responsibilities, but it would also include identifying and countering competitive intelligence threats. Based on your recent experiences, I think you're uniquely qualified for both aspects of the position." Marcus accepted the offer contingently, pending his ability to resolve the situation at Pinnacle Technologies in a way that didn't compromise his professional reputation or legal standing. "One more thing," Richard added as they shook hands. "If your suspicions about this Patricia Wong are correct, we'd be very interested in any evidence you might be able to develop. Industrial espionage is a serious crime, and companies like Morrison Systems need to be held accountable for these practices." Walking back to his car, Marcus felt energized for the first time since Rebecca's promotion had been announced. He had a clear path forward professionally, and he also had a framework for understanding Patricia's actions that made strategic sense. More importantly, he now had allies who could help him navigate the complex legal and ethical issues involved in exposing corporate espionage. His first call was to Rebecca. "We need to meet again," he said when she answered. "I have information that changes everything."
Can you come to my apartment? I've been thinking about our conversation all weekend, and I have some things to show you as well. Rebecca's Capitol Hill apartment was larger and more elegantly furnished than Marcus had expected, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided stunning views of Elliott Bay. She greeted him at the door looking tired but determined, and led him to a dining room table that was covered with documents, printouts, and handwritten notes. "I've been conducting my own investigation," she said without preamble, "and I think Patricia's manipulation goes much deeper than either of us realized." Marcus told her about his breakfast meeting with Richard Chen and the possibility that Patricia was conducting industrial espionage on behalf of Morrison Systems. Rebecca listened with growing excitement, occasionally interrupting to point out connections between his information and her own discoveries. "That explains everything," she said when he finished. "Look at this." She showed him a spreadsheet that tracked Patricia's requests for strategic information from various employees over the past 2 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Patricia had systematically gathered competitive intelligence, market research, and strategic plans from across the organization, always with plausible explanations for why the information was needed. "How did you get access to all of this?" Marcus asked. "I spent the weekend in the office, ostensibly working on my transition into the regional director role. But I was actually reviewing email archives and document repositories that Patricia had given me access to as part of my new responsibilities." Rebecca pulled up another document on her laptop. "Here's the interesting part. Patricia has been forwarding copies of strategic documents to an external email address. The address is registered to a consulting firm called Strategic Insights LLC. But when I researched that company, the only information I could find was a website with generic content and a mailing address that leads to a commercial mail service." Marcus studied the email logs Rebecca was showing him. The pattern of information sharing was extensive and systematic, involving not just his own work, but strategic materials from across the organization. "This is definitely industrial espionage, and it's been going on for years. There's more. I found records of payments from Pinnacle Technologies to Strategic Insights LLC for consulting services. The amounts and timing suggest that Patricia has been using company funds to pay for the intelligence operation she's running." The implications were staggering. Patricia had not only been stealing confidential information for a competitor, but she had been using Pinnacle Technologies' own money to fund the operation. "Rebecca, we have enough evidence here to destroy Patricia's career."
And potentially send her to prison. But we also have enough evidence to seriously damage Pinnacle Technologies if this becomes public. I know. That's why we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Marcus thought about Richard Chen's offer and the opportunity to join Nexus Dynamics in a role that would allow him to pursue corporate espionage cases professionally. He also thought about James Sullivan and the other honest employees at Pinnacle Technologies who would be devastated if the company's reputation was destroyed by Patricia's actions. What if we could expose Patricia without destroying the company? Rebecca looked up from the documents spread across her table. "What do you have in mind?" "We need to create a situation where Patricia exposes herself, where her actions become undeniable, but the focus remains on her individual misconduct rather than systematic problems with the company." They spent the rest of the afternoon developing a plan that would accomplish those goals. The strategy was complex and required careful timing, but it offered the possibility of justice without collateral damage to innocent colleagues. The first step was to create a piece of false intelligence that would be irresistible to Patricia and her handlers at Morrison Systems. Marcus would develop a fake strategic plan for a major client acquisition that would appear to give Pinnacle Technologies a significant competitive advantage. The proposal included financial projections, strategic timelines, and confidential details that would be enormously valuable to Morrison Systems if they were genuine. More importantly, the proposal included subtle markers that would allow them to track how the information was distributed and used. Digital watermarks, unique phrasing, and specific data points that could be monitored across industry communications and competitive intelligence reports. Rebecca's role was to ensure that Patricia had access to the fake proposal through channels that would appear routine and unsuspicious.
As the new regional director, Rebecca had legitimate reasons to request strategic planning documents and to share information with her supervisor. The challenge was making the false intelligence seem authentic while ensuring that Patricia would have access to it quickly enough for the plan to work. On Wednesday morning, Marcus returned to work and began implementing the deception. He created a series of emails and documents that suggested Pinnacle Technologies was in
preliminary discussions with a smaller competitor about a potential acquisition. He scheduled fake meetings with imaginary external consultants and created calendar entries that implied confidential negotiations were taking place. The most important element was a detailed financial analysis that he shared with Rebecca during one of their regular collaboration sessions, knowing that Patricia would likely ask to review any strategic materials related to major business developments. "This acquisition could transform our market position," Marcus told Rebecca during a lunch meeting at a restaurant near the office, speaking loudly enough that other diners could potentially overhear. "If we can close this deal before the government contract bidding process begins, we'll have an insurmountable competitive advantage." Rebecca played her part perfectly, asking detailed questions about the financial projections and requesting copies of the analysis for her own review. That afternoon, she sent Marcus an email asking for additional materials related to the acquisition plan, using language that would make it clear to anyone monitoring their communications that significant strategic information was being shared. The response was quicker than they had anticipated. On Thursday morning, Rebecca received a call from Patricia requesting a meeting to discuss strategic planning coordination for major business development initiatives. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, and Rebecca was asked to bring copies of any relevant strategic materials she had been reviewing. Marcus and Rebecca met for coffee that morning to finalize their approach to the critical phase of the operation. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked. "I think so. The important thing is to make sure Patricia has complete access to the false intelligence while making it seem like I'm reluctant to share confidential information. And you're comfortable with the recording equipment?" Rebecca nodded, touching the small device concealed in her jacket. Washington State was a two-party consent state for recording conversations, but their legal advisors had determined that Rebecca's status as the target of Patricia's manipulation gave them sufficient justification for gathering evidence of ongoing criminal activity. The meeting with Patricia took place in her office at 3 o'clock. Rebecca arrived with a folder containing the false acquisition materials and several legitimate strategic documents to provide context and authenticity. "I wanted to discuss the strategic planning process for your new role," Patricia began, settling behind her desk with the kind of confidence that suggested she was completely unaware of being under investigation. "Of course. I've been reviewing several major initiatives that might fall under regional oversight." Rebecca placed the folder on Patricia's desk and began explaining the various projects, gradually working toward the false acquisition plan. "This one is particularly sensitive," she said, pulling out the fake financial analysis. "Marcus has been working on a potential acquisition that could significantly impact our competitive position." Patricia's interest was immediate and obvious. She leaned forward, studying the documents with an intensity that confirmed Rebecca's suspicions about her motives. "This is fascinating," Patricia said, photographing several pages with her phone. "Have these projections been shared with senior leadership?" "Not yet. Marcus is still developing the final recommendations." "I think this kind of strategic analysis should be reviewed at the department level before it goes to the executive team. Would it be possible for me to get copies of these materials for my own assessment?" Rebecca hesitated, as if reluctant to share confidential information, but eventually agreed to email Patricia the complete acquisition analysis. "I appreciate your thoroughness in reviewing these materials," Rebecca said as the meeting concluded. "I know Marcus will be interested in your feedback." That evening, Marcus and Rebecca met with David Park and Richard Chen's legal team to review the and plan the next phase of the operation. Patricia's eagerness to obtain the false intelligence and her immediate photographing of the documents provided clear evidence of her systematic approach to gathering confidential information. "She's definitely running an intelligence operation," confirmed the security consultant who reviewed the recording. "Her behavior is consistent with trained corporate espionage techniques." The monitoring systems they had established began showing results within hours.
The false acquisition plan appeared in intelligence reports distributed to Morrison Systems' senior leadership team on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Marcus received a call from a contact at the target company mentioned in the fake proposal, asking about rumors of acquisition discussions. "Someone is definitely sharing our strategic information with competitors," Marcus told Rebecca when they met that evening. "The false intelligence has already reached Morrison Systems and probably other companies in the industry." On Monday morning, the final phase of the operation began. Richard Chen contacted James Sullivan directly, requesting a confidential meeting to discuss mutual concerns about strategic information security and internal processes. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon, giving Marcus and Rebecca time to prepare their evidence presentation. Marcus spent Monday evening creating a comprehensive report that documented Patricia's intelligence gathering activities, the false acquisition plan, and the evidence of information sharing with competitors. The report was designed to be clear and factual, focusing on Patricia's actions rather than making broader accusations about Pinnacle Technologies' security practices. Tuesday arrived with unusual weather for Seattle, bright sunshine and clear skies that seemed to forecast positive developments. Marcus arrived at work early, knowing that the day would determine not just his own professional future, but the resolution of a situation that had evolved far beyond a simple promotion disappointment. At 10 o'clock, he received a text from Rebecca. "James wants to see me at 2 p.m. Patricia will be there too. I think this is it." Marcus spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on routine tasks, while his mind raced through possible scenarios for the afternoon's confrontation. Would Patricia realize that she had been exposed? Would she attempt to deflect blame or create alternative explanations for her actions? Would James Sullivan be prepared to take decisive action, or would he try to manage the situation quietly to protect the company's reputation? At 1:30, Marcus received a call from James Sullivan's assistant, asking him to join the meeting in the executive conference room. The inclusion was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Marcus preferred to be present for the resolution rather than hearing about it secondhand. The executive conference room was intimidating under the best of circumstances, with its polished mahogany table, leather chairs, and walls lined with awards and photographs of company milestones. Today, with the afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, it felt like a courtroom preparing for a crucial verdict. James Sullivan was already seated at the head of the table when Marcus arrived, flanked by two people Marcus didn't recognize, but who appeared to be lawyers based on their formal attire and serious expressions. Rebecca was sitting across from them, looking composed but tense. Patricia entered a few minutes later, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of confident expression that suggested she believed this meeting was routine. "Thank you all for making time for this discussion," James began once everyone was seated. "We're here to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding strategic information security and internal processes." Patricia's confidence faltered slightly, and Marcus saw her glance quickly around the table, perhaps noticing for the first time that the meeting included legal representation. "Before we begin, want to make it clear that this conversation will be recorded and that you have the right to legal representation if you choose to request it." The formal language made Patricia's discomfort obvious. She shifted in her chair and her hands moved nervously to her portfolio. "I'm not sure I understand the nature of these concerns," Patricia said. James nodded to Rebecca, who opened a folder and began presenting the evidence they had compiled. She started with the documentation of Patricia's systematic requests for strategic information, moved through the email logs showing forwarding to external addresses, and concluded with the false acquisition plan and evidence of its rapid distribution to competitors. Patricia's face grew pale as the presentation continued, and Marcus could see her calculating possible responses and explanations. When Rebecca finished, the room was silent, except for the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. "Patricia, would you like to respond to these allegations?" James asked. "I think there may be some misunderstandings about standard departmental procedures," Patricia began, but her voice lacked conviction. "Information sharing and strategic coordination are normal parts of my supervisory responsibilities." One of the lawyers opened a laptop and turned it toward Patricia. "We'd like you to review these email communications between your account and Strategic Insights LLC," he said. "Can you explain the nature of your relationship with that organization?" Marcus watched Patricia's expression change from confusion to recognition to fear as she realized that her external communications had been discovered and documented. "I occasionally consult with external firms on strategic planning matters," she said carefully, "including sharing confidential financial projections, client lists, and competitive analyses. Any information sharing would have been within appropriate parameters. Ms. Wong, we have evidence that you forwarded confidential strategic materials to external parties within hours of obtaining them. We have documentation of payments from Pinnacle Technologies to a shell company that appears to exist solely to facilitate these information transfers. And we have proof that confidential information you accessed was subsequently used by our competitors to undermine our business relationships." The weight of the evidence was overwhelming, and Patricia seemed to realize that denial was no longer a viable strategy. "I want to speak with a lawyer before continuing this conversation," she said finally. "That's your right," James replied, "but I want to be clear about the situation you're facing. We have evidence of industrial espionage, theft of intellectual property, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. These are serious criminal charges, and we will be cooperating fully with law enforcement investigations." Patricia was escorted from the building by security while the lawyers began the process of securing her computer, files, and access credentials. Marcus and Rebecca remained in the conference room with James for a debriefing that lasted another hour. "I want to thank both of you for bringing this situation to my attention," James said, when the legal team had finished their initial documentation. "I also want to apologize for the way the promotion process was handled. It's clear that Patricia manipulated the situation for her own purposes, and that manipulation affected decisions that should have been based solely on merit." He turned to Marcus directly. "I understand that you've received an attractive offer from another company, and I wouldn't blame you for accepting it given what you've experienced here, but I'd like the opportunity to discuss how we can make things right." Marcus had been anticipating this conversation, and he had prepared his response carefully. "I appreciate that, James, but I think the opportunity with Nexus Dynamics is the right move for me professionally. The experience of the past few weeks has shown me that I'm interested in strategic intelligence work, and that's not something I can pursue effectively at Pinnacle Technologies. I understand completely, and I want you to know that you'll have outstanding references from this company, along with our gratitude for your professionalism in handling this difficult situation." Rebecca's situation was more complex, since her promotion had been the result of Patricia's manipulation. She and James agreed that she would remain in the regional director role, but with additional oversight and support to ensure that her transition was based on legitimate strategic planning rather than tainted intelligence. The following weeks brought a series of developments that validated the investigation and provided closure to the situation. Patricia Wong was arrested and charged with industrial espionage, with additional charges pending related to fraud and conspiracy. Morrison Systems faced a federal investigation that revealed extensive illegal intelligence gathering activities across multiple competitors. Strategic Insights LLC was revealed to be a front organization that had facilitated corporate espionage for several years. Marcus began his new role at Nexus Dynamics with a comprehensive understanding of corporate intelligence threats and a reputation as someone who could identify and counter sophisticated espionage operations. The position exceeded his expectations in terms of both professional satisfaction and career advancement opportunities. Rebecca proved to be an effective regional director, implementing strategic initiatives that were genuinely her own while building a team based on merit rather than manipulation. She maintained her friendship with Marcus, and they occasionally collaborated on industry projects that benefited both of their companies. The most satisfying aspect of the resolution was the impact on Morrison Systems. The federal investigation revealed that their competitive advantages had been largely based on stolen intelligence rather than superior strategy or execution. Several key executives were prosecuted, and the company's reputation was severely damaged.
More importantly, the investigation led to industry-wide improvements in information security practices that protected other companies from similar espionage operations. 6 months after the confrontation in the executive conference room, Marcus received an unexpected call from James Sullivan. "I wanted to let you know that the board has approved a new position that I think you might find interesting," James said. "We're creating a Director of Strategic Security role to prevent situations like what we experienced with Patricia. The position would involve both defensive and investigatory responsibilities, and it would report directly to me." Marcus was flattered by the offer, but he was also deeply satisfied with his work at Nexus Dynamics. "I appreciate the confidence, James, but I'm very happy where I am." "I figured you would be, but I wanted you to know that you'll always have opportunities here if your circumstances change." The conversation reminded Marcus of how much his professional life had changed since the morning he had discovered Rebecca's promotion announcement. What had seemed like a devastating career setback had actually been the beginning of a journey that led to opportunities he never could have imagined. More importantly, the experience had taught him valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation, building alliances, and responding strategically to complex challenges. The skills he had developed while investigating Patricia's espionage operation had become central to his new career, and the confidence he had gained from successfully navigating the situation had opened doors to leadership opportunities that might otherwise have been years away. The final vindication came a year later when Marcus was invited to speak at a conference on corporate security. His presentation on identifying and countering internal intelligence threats was well received by an audience of executives and security professionals, and several attendees approached him afterward to discuss similar situations they had encountered in their own organizations. Walking back to his hotel that evening, Marcus reflected on the complexity of the journey that had brought him to this point. Rebecca's betrayal was real, but it had also been the result of manipulation by someone with much more sinister motives. Patricia's espionage operation had been sophisticated and damaging, but exposing it had created opportunities for justice and industry-wide improvements in security practices. Most importantly, the experience had taught Marcus that apparent betrayals and disappointments often contained hidden opportunities for those who are willing to investigate carefully, build strategic alliances, and respond with intelligence rather than emotion. The lesson was one that he carried into every aspect of his professional life. When faced with setbacks or challenges, the most productive response was not anger or despair, but curiosity about what larger forces might be at work and how those forces could be redirected toward positive outcomes.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.